Welcome to session 2 of the FCSI BYO CEU event. We have a couple of great speakers lined up for you this session. And before I hand it over to Joe, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We'll host a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A feature to post your questions. The session qualifies for 1.5 CEUs. Upon entering the Zoom session, you were asked to enter your name. This will allow us to track everyone's participation. We'll submit to FCSI to ensure that you receive your CEUs. We'll give everybody a few minutes to make sure your name is entered correctly before we capture attendance. So let's get on with the fun stuff. I'd like to introduce Joe Carbonara to discuss the 5 points to consider post-pandemic. Joe is joining us from Chicago today and refers to himself as a diehard Cubs fan. Joe is the editorial director of Food Service Equipment and Supplies and Restaurant Development and Design magazines. Prior to becoming editor-in-chief for FE&S in 2004, Joe was a marketing manager for Smith Buckland Corp., where he spent 6 years working with the North American Association of Food Service Equipment Manufacturers. Joe is also a fan of the finer things in life, such as an ice-cold PBR. Joe, off to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. And thanks to Tim, and thanks to, I like the name of the presentation, which is, BYO CEU. So I want to say, thanks to FCSI, NW, and PRNW for having ME here. It's a good opportunity to be here with you guys today and kind of share a little bit, of what we've been seeing and what we've been learning, within the food service industry. And I got a few things I think that are pretty exciting, and I also have my slides at the very end, so don't look too closely. There we go. Okay, can you guys see these slides? Did I do this correctly? There we go.
Yeah, Joe.
Now can we see them?
Yes, we can.
You'd think it was my first rodeo, Janelle, and yet it's not. So I like Janelle in the role of the voice of God. I like that. So, lots of data, lots of stuff coming at you regarding COVID-19 and all that, and the pandemic and how it's changing food service and so forth. And what we decided to do today with this presentation, because we have about 30 minutes to be together, is to really focus in, I think, on 5 factors that are really shaping the way the industry is responding and the way the industry will start to rebound. I mean, there's a lot of nuance into all this stuff, and it's a very, very fluid situation, as you very well know. But what we want to do is kind of focus in on 5 factors that I think we're going to really be shaping the food service industry over the next 9 months to a year. And I think the first factor that I'd like to share is that the fact that all economics are local. In the past, it was great to be able to benchmark your performance across the food service industry on a national level and so forth. And I guess there's still some value to that. But right now, given the way that state and local governments are dealing with mitigations related to COVID-19, the different steps that they're taking, the way they're enforcing or not enforcing things like masking, social distancing, that sort of thing, the way they're dealing with on-premise dining versus off-premise dining and so forth. I really think that looking at things on a national level, we're trying to gauge the health of food service can be pretty, it's not the greatest exercise. I think looking at a more local basis, I think can really be impactful. You look here in Chicago, for example, where I'm from, our state and our city has been pretty conservative in terms of how it's approached dining, but that's nothing compared to what we've seen done in New York City, for example. In New York, they went without indoor on-premises dining from March all the way till September 30th, and they were getting ready to think about closing it when their rates got back around 1 or 2%. In contrast, here in Illinois, we got on-premises dining, indoor on-premises dining back in the middle of the summer, and when our rates were still significantly higher than New York, and we kept it around for a while. That's why I think really focusing on what's happening in an individual market and individual segments within that market is really, really important. I think the other thing to understand is too, from an operator's perspective, operators' outlooks have changed dramatically in the past year. And as a result of the things I've just described, their outlook will vary greatly based on location, based on segment, and so forth. We've heard a lot from the from service agents, for example, and others working within the food service industry, where the state sets one set of guidelines, the county sets another, then the municipality within that county sets another set of guidelines. So things can vary greatly, even within really, really tight geographies. But I think one of the most important things is to take a look at, on the slide there, you see some data from Data Essential, and it looks at operators are rightly concerned, and I think they're worried about their survival, and this is normally a pretty optimistic bunch. 58% are worried but remain confident that they'll get through this. But there's still, that's what 70% of operators that are still really, really concerned. And what's concerning them is really changed considerably over the past year. 67% of operators say the virus is their top priority per the National Restaurant Association, and there's a 54-point gap between the virus and what their next highest concern is. And I think that's a really important thing to look at, because last year the top three things that they had, their top three concerns, were all labor related, whether it was wages, healthcare, finding and retaining, all that sort of stuff. All that pales in comparison right now to finding a cure for this virus and getting business up and flowing. I mean, even sales, which is the lifeblood, right, of so many food service operations, even that is way down on the list at 7%. So I think that's one real important thing to know. I think the second thing too is that operator circumstances vary very greatly by segment, by location, and more. You look at on the screen right there, there's some really important data points also from Data Essential. When you think about it, you're looking at 30% of operators that have closed at some point in time, that have 30 was it? No, excuse me, that's 40% of the operators on there, or 45% of operators have closed at least for part of the time. I mean, that's a huge chunk of the operator universe. And 10% have closed and reopened multiple times. That really, really plays a key role in their focus, plans they're able to make, moving forward, and so forth. It affects how they work with labor. It affects how they order food. It affects menuing. All those sorts of things, I think, are really, really, really affected by that. We have seen some success stories, within the industry, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of this, as I have. Right now, the current environment really, really favors QSRs. That's because consumers still really see the pandemic and our current situation as being more of a healthcare than an independent, than an economic situation. So as a result, QSRs are deemed pretty safe, right? Because you can do things through the drive-through where you don't have to get out, interact with others. They've gotten pretty good with handing things out through, the food on a tray, so you don't have to touch hands or any of those sorts of things. And in general, consumers just see going through the drive-through right now as part of their new normal, and a very safe part of that. But it's more than just drive-throughs that are enabling QSRs to flourish during this time. They were early adopters of technology, ordering apps, ordering ahead, kiosk ordering, all those sorts of things, I think were very, very important. And I think prior to the pandemic, consumers were very used to using drive-through technology and the apps of so many of the limited service restaurants. So it's no coincidence then that drive-through sales are up 37% this year, according to the NPD group, and delivery is up 114%. So we're seeing tremendous, tremendous growth in an industry where the average restaurant is down 36%, according to the National Restaurant Association. We're seeing growth of that level in areas such as drive-through, and almost three times that in terms of delivery. The same can't be said for full service, however. When you look at full service in its many forms, that is continuing to struggle. And full service was predicated on providing an experience. QSR, very transactional, getting into this mindset where the virus and keeping us all apart facilitates, I think, a very transactional mindset. that was just a natural transition, I think, for QSRs to thrive in that. For full service, we've seen a lot of challenges getting to that point, but they are getting better. We're even seeing fine dining restaurants like Alinea here in Chicago, which is a very white tablecloth, experience-driven restaurant, really doing a better job of figuring out a way to get food either for delivery or finish, cook at home with meal kits and that sort of thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about how some restaurants are adapting here in a second. And that kind of leads me, I think, to the second point that I want to make. Old formats can really have new life in this type of environment. We don't have to throw everything away. One great example of that is Wholesome by Yogurtland. Yogurtland is a fast casual frozen yogurt concept that's been around for a while. They have a sizable install base. What's interesting though is they developed this new product, this new platform called Wholesome by Yogurtland. And what this is Yogurtland would be, you'd go in and you'd pick whatever frozen yogurt you want and you'd customize it with fruit or other toppings and that sort of thing. What Yogurtland has done is it's added it's created this new concept called Wholesome by Yogurtland. And it has 3 modules that it's adding onto its restaurant. They call it the 3 Bs. The first one is bakery, the second one is bowls, and the third one is beverage. So bakery is a whole collection of sweet and savory toasts that are available on the menu. Beverage, as its name implies, is a combination of hot and cold beverages like chai lattes or fruit flavor infused waters, sparkling and flat. And bowls are bowls. They're salads, they're grain bowls, they're that sort of thing. And what Wholesome by Yogurtland does is it takes the existing infrastructure within a Yogurtland, takes out maybe 2 or 3. It'll take out 2 or 3 frozen yogurt machines and place them with the 3 Bs that they have. The beverage, the beverage, the bakery, and the bowls. And they do that with minimal cooking equipment that really requires no hood. So they're able to operate all of this from within their existing footprints. And what they're able to do is be able to up their appeal during multiple day parts, because now you have a lunch. You have a lunch option, for example, or maybe even a breakfast option with some of those toasts and with the coffee. They're able to do without hood because the equipment we're talking about here are rice cookers, toasters, and coffee makers. So you don't really need to vent those within the space. And what they've done is they've offered more menu versatility or broaden the appeal of the menu within an existing infrastructure, and it allows them the opportunity to maybe even double their check average. So it's a really interesting kind of a setup, and the fact that it's modular, which is one of those things I think is really going to happen moving forward more. The fact that it's modular means that if they're in shopping malls or lifestyle centers or whatever we call these things these days, what they're able to do with these things is if there's a Starbucks in there and they can't offer beverage because of that, they can just add the bakery and the bowl. So there's a lot of flexibility that they've added onto their existing prototype. The next thing is the Chipotle Digital Kitchen. Now, this here really emulates, or really not emulates, really captures the sights, the sounds, the smells of a traditional Chipotle unit. But what they've done is they've taken away the POS component. And I think that that's a way to allow Chipotle to go into some new areas. It allows them to make more effective and efficient use of labor, and it allows them to kind of meet customers where they're at a little bit more. By that I mean it really allows them to leverage the digital experience. There'll be a kiosk for ordering in these locations. People will be able to order on the app and so forth. There's minimal seating that's shown up in here, but when you walk into the space, you're meant to be able to see people making the food, for example, smell the chicken getting cooked on the grills and see them assembling orders. And then the orders go, you'll see on your screen on the left there, a place where bags for food to be held. And they're still leveraging their same approach to the beverage platform, which you'll see on the right. This is part of Chipotle's master plan to work within the type of footprint that they're used to having, but maybe making it a little bit more customizable or maybe even a little bit smaller to go into some other places and really kind of capitalize on the digital lifestyle. This isn't just a COVID thing. This is something that Chipotle and other brands like it, I think, are moving toward to stay connected with customers who have really, really fast lifestyles. And of course, there's one-offs one-off hospitality's one-off at home line. One-off hospitality is a multi-concept operator based here in Chicago. They have everything from Publican, which is a German beer hall, meat and beer forward kind of concept, to Avec, which is super high-end fine dining. They have Big Star Taco, lots of bourbons and whiskeys and tacos and tequila and that sort of thing. So they have multiple price points, multiple formats, and so forth. What they realized here in Chicago was the fact that with their restaurants being closed, they had to figure out a way to kind of keep revenue going. They also realized that a lot of their customers either come from the suburbs down into the city to go to their locations, or they're people who are visiting from out of town who like to try some local, a little taste of the local fare, if you will. So what they did was develop one-off at home, and this is a series of meal kits that are prepared in their restaurants. They didn't add commissary kitchen or anything like that. They added some freezers to their restaurants, and each of the meal kits are prepared under the watchful eye and supervision of the chefs that work at each one of these locations. It's a carefully curated menu, meaning you can't get everything that they offer at all of these restaurants, but it's a carefully developed menu that's decided to travel well, that freezes, and what they've done is they've done a really good job of extending the experience that they offer in the restaurant to you at home. So there's really detailed information on how to prepare the food, how to plate the food. There's playlists that are available, recipes for cocktails, or through some of their other locations, you can even order cocktails that would pair well with all of this. So what they've tried to do is really kind of transition the bigger hospitality experience back to the homes of their customers. I think the other thing that we need to understand now is that food flows in mysterious ways. And you probably, as food service consultants and designers, or even MAS consultants, I think you know that better than most. In the old days, food used to basically show up at the back door, right, at the from the loading dock, and it would transition, effortlessly from the back of the house to the front of the house, right? And I think, and that's just kind of it all went in one direction. But prior to the pandemic, with the advent of third-party delivery, order ahead features on apps and that sort of thing, we started, even prominence catering and that sort of stuff, we started seeing food starting to flow in multiple ways. And this is really, really having an impact on food service design. And we're only in the infancy of this. I think the one thing that can't change now is that although food is flowing in multiple ways, the one thing that can't change or be compromised is efficiency and the ability to deliver on a good experience. And you have to understand that the customer experiences that are being delivered are different by segment. The person who wants to eat in has a different set of expectations for the experience versus the delivery driver who's coming to pick up food versus the person who's eating that food on the other end. Once the food gets delivered, and the individual that's walking in to pick up their order, either order it on a kiosk or order it ahead, has a different set of experiences. So you're juggling different expectations regarding experience in terms of food timing, quality, and so forth. So as a result, one of the things that we're starting to see more and more that it's becoming, I think, more prominent in this conversation is we're starting to see, kitchen placement is starting to evolve, and the structure of it as well. The kitchen may not necessarily be out in front or front and center anymore, but it will still have a presence within the operation moving forward. Also, we expect more modular kitchen design to control the flow of staff, to control labor, and that sort of thing, and also to help promote social distancing in the near term. That way, by making your kitchen teams a little bit more modular, you can break off a group when you don't need them, or infection happens, or something along those lines, and you won't compromise the rest of the operations. The big question that we're sort of wondering right now: will multiple make lines become a part of the future? That's one of the things that we're wondering about. We've seen it at Chipotle, we've seen it at Jersey Mike's, we're starting to see it in other places. Will that become more prominent to handle the flow of food that's going off premises? Along those lines, a couple different operators here are prototypes that are really embracing the notion of food flowing in multiple directions. One is Burger King. This is a new prototype that Burger King designed, that Burger King released here within the last month and a half, I would say. And what's striking to me is that, before, with the typical Burger King that you have on the corner right now, you go through the drive-thru, you walk through the front door to get your food. What's interesting about this is that, they've taken arguably the same real estate footprint, but they're letting food flow in multiple ways. So there's the drive-through, which almost looks a little bit more like a high-tech bank or high-tech car wash drive-through that you go through. There's a walk-up component. I can still walk up to the counter and order my food. And then there's a drive-up component as well, where I can pull into one of the parking spots and text them to let them know that my order's here if I order on the app, or I can order once I get into one of those spots. In addition, operators can also use vertical space more here with this particular layout, which I thought was interesting, because that's the vertical space comes into place where they're using the dine-in. So you see on the right side of your screen there, the image that's there, you're able to see like where the on-premise dining would be if the operator chooses to do that. It's a great use of vertical space, not something we've seen before. And there could be components of the kitchen that are in that upper tier, and the food might flow down to the drive-through by a conveyor or some other automated means. So really, really interesting stuff happening here with Burger King, and others are really getting into it. But it's not all about the QSR, and it's not all about the limited service. Here you see Smoky Bones, and this is a prototype that they're getting ready to start build. For those of you that are not familiar with Smoky Bones, it's a casual dining concept, as the name implies, that's really centered on meat, and flame cooked meat. And it's a real interesting concept for sure that's growing. On the right side of your screen, though, they understand that casual dining is going to get affected by this, and frankly, not enough casual dining operators have really embraced the notion that their business is about to change. So if you look at it here on the left side of the screen, there's one entrance for dining on premises for customers who choose to dine on premise. On the right side of your screen, though, you'll see another entrance for third-party delivery drivers or customers who want to pick up their food and take it back home. The kitchen is going to be positioned, there's only one kitchen, and the kitchen is going to be positioned as such in this location where you can still see some of the action in the kitchen, but it's also going to flow, so the food will flow to the dining room, and it'll also flow to meet the people who are on the right side of the screen getting the takeout and delivery. And I think that's really important to understand. They intend to incorporate technology throughout the process here a little bit. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that their footprint will be a little bit smaller, but the real estate that they're going to consume will be roughly the same, because they're expecting a slight decrease in on-premises diners. And I think that's a really important thing to know. I think that could happen in a lot of instances, particularly for the next 12 to 15 months. And of course, there's the hot topic right now, which are virtual brands and ghost kitchens. Ghost kitchens, are something that we've been talking about for quite some time. And I think the most common thing that people think of when they look at ghost kitchens, and they think of Kitchens United, which is a ghost kitchen company, and restaurants rent out space in there. And I guess one of the things I want to clear up is that the difference between a ghost kitchen and a commissary kitchen, because we still get a lot of questions about it from all segments, which is fascinating to me. Ghost kitchens are designed to produce restaurant food for delivery. I mean, that's really what a ghost kitchen does. Commissary kitchen is created to produce more bulk things, bulk meals, bulk sauces, but things that support other aspects of a food service operation, and then eventually get trucked to another point of service, driven to another point of service. And that's kind of one of the key differences. But we're seeing ghost kitchens really populate right now, and it makes sense. It's a low-cost way for existing brands to expand their footprint. They can go into a deal with DoorDash or Kitchens United and kind of have at it from there. What's been the more interesting development, I think, in this whole situation has been the development of virtual brands. We're seeing all sorts of things kind of come out. We've seen Brinker developed a chicken and a wing-based one. And what a virtual brand is, it's a restaurant that you really can't find. You can't find them on a map. You can't walk up to their window and get it. You can only really access them through third-party delivery. And if you look on a DoorDash app or a Caviar app or whatever, you'll find this restaurant. You're like, wow, I didn't know they were here in my town. I should order. That looks good. I'm going to order from that. But you can't walk up and get it. They're going to deliver that to you either by the delivery staff that they employ or the delivery staff who they contract with. And it's been so good for some of these multi-concept operators like Brinker and Bloomin' Brands and so forth, that they're really seeing these businesses grow into multi-million-dollar revenue opportunities for them. And what they're doing, I think that's most interesting, is they're identifying opportunities within their existing operations where they have excess capacity, adding a new concept that works well with their existing menu. One of the more recent ones that's come up was in the QSR space. When Nathan Famous launched something called Wings of New York. And really, really fascinating thing with it, Nathan's Famous, known for hot dogs, Coney Island, and Joey Chestnut shoving wieners into his mouth on the 4th of July. But now they're getting in the wing game. And they've rolled it out to, I think, 10 locations or something like that in New York City, and they're getting ready to roll it out system-wide. And that'll be a game changer. It will allow them to make a more effective and efficient use of their space, and it'll also allow them to continue to appeal to different customer segments. Step number 4, and we're getting near the end of my time here, but is takeout takes more. Takeout. When you look at takeout, everyone's into takeout right now because it's really the only game in town, and that's going to happen for quite some time. But the reality is executing takeout is much easier said than done. And as the use of it increases, so does the competition and expectations. During COVID, with dining rooms being closed, it's been easier for operators to take more space. For their takeout, but as dining rooms reopen, some of that's going to go away. So we're really talking here about space allocation. We're talking about better and safer holding, both hot and cold, and that sort of thing, and more flexible use of staff to really be able to meet the needs of takeout. And I think that's really, really important. One great example of takeout getting a reboot here is Spyce, and this is a company out of Boston. And what you're looking at there, so Spyce is a better for you bowls and salads kind of concept. And you order your food from them using an app or a kiosk in the location. All the ingredients are prepped ahead of time by hand, by staff on premises. And then it goes to a robotic plancha, which heats the food to the desired cooking temp and pushes it down the line to the right part there where you see the bowl where the food gets dumped into. And as that's cooking, it's telling the rice cooker to make grains or rice, and then it gets dumped in, that sort of thing. This is one of them far out things that only a couple of guys from MIT could develop. But it is a really impressive setup and something very, very much worth monitoring. And finally, the last part is more questions and answers remain. I think that's a big thing. Everyone has all sorts of questions about what's going on in the industry right now in terms of equipment and that sort of thing. And I think that the answer right now is we don't know. One of the first questions that we keep seeing right now is for the longest time, manufacturers have had the ability to do IoT has been a big thing, big draw, or big topic conversation among consultants I've been talking to lately. Manufacturers have had developed equipment that can communicate either with dashboards or text or whatever through the internet and that sort of thing. And we haven't seen it take off. Recently we've seen companies like Alto-Shaam, Rationale, even Well-Built, really kind of emphasizing those sorts of things. The question is the benefits of such a thing they're undeniable, yet operators have been slow to catch on, and we're not sure why, and we're not sure what the tipping point of that's going to be. But right now, everybody seems to be focused on the robots. And everyone's wondering, when robots are really going to storm the castle. Here you see White Castle, which has recently expanded its test of robots. They use Flippy, which is a product from a company called Miso Robotics, which was based in Northern California. And it's an interesting product, and White Castle just broadened its use of these. I think they doubled the number of locations that are doing it. The interesting thing to note, though, is that the robots don't necessarily replace people. They just work side by side with people. And I think that's a really important thing. We haven't seen many instances where the robot replaces people entirely. So we're wondering, a couple of things we're wondering is when will operators embrace remote monitoring and benefits of that sort of thing further? What's going to happen with robots? The one thing that we don't think will change, though, is that the more, as Alphonse Carr once said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Across the board, we continue to see a continued emphasis on smaller footprint when it comes to equipment, and a continued emphasis on multi-use equipment. Those are two really, really big and important things that we keep saying. And with restaurant operations in such a state of transition and flux at the moment, I just think that level of flexibility, being smaller and being able to execute multiple things, is really, really going to become more and more important, and very much in the near term. So with that, you kind of got the speed run there of 5 things that I think are really important, but I'd like to invite Janelle back on, or Tim, and see what kind of questions you guys have.
Yeah, Joe, it's all great information, and I want to try to spur some Q&A here with a couple thoughts that I had. The first one is, pre-COVID, we saw chains such as Chipotle installing a second make line and really focusing on developing a drive-up window, those kinds of things. Now, it looks like they're moving to this completely digital kitchen. Do you think that that's going to be the push, and the Chipotle that we knew of in the past is going to totally transition to this new look? Or how do you think that's going to look? And then second to that, this has always been a thorn in my side on the off-premise dining pickup counter. Can you talk about security there? Because there's from my point of view as a customer, I don't see much stopping somebody from just walking in the door and grabbing an order and taking it. So talk about that a little bit as well.
Sure. So start with Chipotle. I think both are going to exist. I think it kind of depends. I think the answer is it sort of depends. I think that Chipotle will. I think that the digital locations, if you will, and they even opened up a walk-up window for one of their locations here in Chicago, not right across the street from Wrigley Field, as a matter of fact. So you can order on the app, you go up, hit the bell, and say, "Hey, I'm Joe. I'm here to pick up my burrito," and they hand it to you. That sort of thing. It works well. So I think that the digitalization of Chipotle is going to continue, and I think what that means is we're going to see multiple formats, multiple prototype or multiple formats for them within the in the future. Meaning that I think these digital locations are going to be in densely populated urban areas where you're going to see more walk-up traffic, even pushing out into residential areas. So, for example, I live in Chicago, and I'm about a mile from Wrigley Field, but I'm not downtown in a big business hub, right? But more densely populated area where a lot of people around me do like to walk to go pick up lunch or to go pick up food, and I can very easily see them putting a digital one around here. We have a couple schools around here that have open campus policies at lunchtime and that sort of thing, where students go get stuff. So I think they're going to use that to strategically grow and strategically fill in, sort of like what P.F. Chang's did with the location that they just opened up in Manhattan. P.F. Chang's opened up P.F. Chang's to go, it's a to go thing. So you order online, order at a kiosk or whatever. Basically, the whole P.F. Chang's menu is there, but the place is only about 1,700 square feet, and you either pick it up or you have it delivered. So I think it'll coexist with the other places that they have, and I think you'll keep seeing the digital make line, the second make line in these locations, because they're still going to want to be able to deal with people who choose to walk in and order and dine on premise. Their expectations of time they're going to be one thing. People who are ordering off the app is going to be another. I think the big issue, and this kind of connects to your second question, Tim, is how do you queue these orders correctly, and how do you time them and manage the timing of the customers when they come? And that's one of the biggest challenges operators across the board face when they're transitioning into a model that includes a lot more pickup or takeout, if you will. Security, I think security is going to become an important thing. I think they're going to handle, so there's really 3 key ways I think you can handle it. Number one is the old-fashioned way. I walk up to the counter, I say, "Tim, my name is Joe. I ordered a burger," and you hand it to me and say, "Thanks, Joe, for your business," and I leave. That's one way we secure it. The second way is you see the bookcases like you see at Panera, or you saw in the Chipotle example, where there's all the bags of food that are on there, but they're using packaging that shows that the food has been tampered with. If somebody opens it and tries to take your food and that sort of thing. I have talked with operators who said, look, if somebody walks away with a meal that's not, that's not theirs, it's on us. We have to replenish and we have to do it. It's not something operators really want to do, but it's something that they have to do. And I think the third option is the our more hot and cold lockers and more hot and cold storage. Little Caesars was one of the first ones that had it some years ago with pizza. I could call and order ahead of my pizza order online and just walk into their store and never have to interact with someone. Just pull the pizza out of, I know it's in slot 3 and I punch in my 3-digit code and I get my pizza. We're seeing more of those lockers that are out there, and they're going to come online more. They have the option of ambient and holding food at ambient temperatures or as well as hot. Hatco's getting into them. We've heard other QSRs, are really talking about, I think Smoky Bones will look into that in certain instances as well. So I think we'll see a variety of that. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Tim, for the great question. We have another question that just came in for you, Joe. So I'm going to read this off for you. As a populace, we have learned to work around the absence of the restaurant experiences we previously enjoyed. This finds many of us enjoying home prep meals, and even more important to the point, we don't anticipate heading out to eat each week. How will restaurants rebuild this interest?
How will restaurants rebuild? Well, I think the good news is that according to the data we've seen from the National Restaurant Association, consumers in general are interested to going back to a full-service restaurant experience when it's safe. The most recent data I saw from the National Restaurant Association said that 71% of consumers are not using full-service restaurants any way that they would like. So I think number one, in the very, very near term, I think the first thing that happens is once it's deemed safe in wherever you're at, and it's going to be different everywhere. I mean, look, they're pressing outdoor dining here in Illinois and Chicago. We're in the frigid Midwest. And I think California is shutting down outdoor dining in some areas. So that goes back to my first point of everything is regional. So it's going to vary, I think, considerably. That said, I think number one, you have to, all the safety things that we used to do and put behind, didn't want anyone to see us wipe down the tables before somebody came and sat down and that sort of thing. We have to put signage up. We have to list what we're doing. We have to put on a sanitation show. I think that's number one. I think number two, you really have to focus on experience, and you really have to focus on hospitality. Yes, you're seeing the opportunity, I think, to eat, to get food delivered, and I love the Spotify list or the playlist that can come with some Mexican food to make it happen, or a classic cocktail recipe and that sort of thing. And I think restaurants are doing a great job of facilitating that type of experience. But what I think restaurants are going to have to do to draw people back is really amp up the hospitality. So make it safe, make it inviting, make it easier, make yourself easier to use, and really be flexible. I think that'll come back. I tell you, I for one can't wait to get back.
Thanks, Joe. I think out of all of this, it's really interesting to see all the innovation that's happening on the operator side and even on the manufacturer side.
Yeah, for sure. Tons of innovation. And one of the things I like about innovation, when I look at things like Chipotle solution, for example, or one-off solution, and the things that they're doing. One of the things I truly like about it is that they're innovating within their existing box. It's kind of like that scene in Apollo 13, which I've been watching with the kids. My daughter's a little bit lately, where he dumps out, looks like he threw all an Ace Hardware down on the conference table and says, you got to build an air filter out of this. I think innovation loves to be confined. I think innovation likes to work within real specific boundaries and get super duper creative about how you problem solve within that. So one-off at home, delivering restaurant quality food that's easy to take at the last mile when you get home. I think that's really super cool. We did a thing here in Chicago a couple of months ago with Alinea, which if any of you have ever been to Chicago, and Alinea, it's one of the Michelin star kind of restaurant, and that sort of thing. And it was crazy good. It felt like we ate out. So I think innovating within what you have and focusing on what you have versus what you don't have, I think is good. I think, adding casters, manufacturers like to send me press releases to let me know that they put casters on something, and that's innovative. That's not innovative, that's just smart. So I think really kind of understanding that difference. But, we've seen some interesting stuff come from manufacturers. Those Hatco lockers, I think, are one of the things that really comes to mind. But there's a ton more interesting stuff. More ventless is coming off. And I think that's pretty interesting as well.
Well, and I think it kind of follows that motto of work smarter, right? So we're kind of forced to do that right now. But Joe, it looks like we've come to the end of our session with you. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we're going to go ahead and let you go.
Okay, what I'll do, Janelle, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but I will send a PDF of this slide deck to you. If any of the FCSI members that were on the call would like a PDF version, you're welcome to send it to them. And in there is my contact info and that if anybody has follow-up questions, happy to do it. You know, always happy to help. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate all that information. It definitely gives us a lot to think about as we move towards 2021.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to kick this virtual show over to Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and talk sanitation and serving solutions for K through 12 with Tom Wilczak and Marcy Matthews. Tim Wilczak, pardon me, is the Director of Field Marketing with Delfield. He's been in the industry for 22 years and with Delfield for 18 years. Marcy Matthews is the Director of Product Management for Delfield. Marcy has been in the industry for 23 years and has spent 17 of those years with Delfield. And as a native Texan, I'd like to kick it over to one of the coolest serving lines I've ever seen. Take it away, guys.
All right, thank you very much. As mentioned, I'm Tim Wilczak, and with me today is...
Hello, everyone. Marcy Matthews here. I'm excited to spend some time with you and go through some things that are happening in the world of serving.
Great, and so we're going to be a little bit interactive. We'll have some slides that I'll primarily be talking to you on. So we'll show that, we'll share screens on that, and then we'll go back to live, and we'll do that at a few different times where Marcy will be taking the lead in front of some equipment. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks for FCSI, PRNW, and everybody else involved. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so today we'll be focusing in on serving and sanitation solutions, serving lines, and then, we can't forget the importance, of course, of hot and cold food holding in serving lines. Obviously, there's a lot going on today with the pandemic, with the needs for enhanced sanitation beyond just the hot and cold food holding. So we'll also be touching on that. Just a quick reminder that if you do have any questions you do want to submit, please do that through the Zoom Q&A function if it's throughout, or we'll certainly have some time at the end during the Q&A session if you'd like to wait to ask during that time. So focusing on the serving and sanitation solutions, we'll start with a bit of an overview, if you will, on serving lines in general. Some of the things that customers ask for and need, especially today. And then we'll dial in a little more onto cold pan, as well as hot well and multifunctional well designs. Food shields, of course, obviously very important in that food safety, especially now in enhanced sanitation needs. And then enhanced sanitation options such as shields and cashier stand areas that we hadn't necessarily had in the past. So first, obviously, where do you start? And so we won't spend a whole lot of time here, obviously, but you've got the critical timelines, any budgetary expectations, which of course, as consultants, you're obviously helping to plan for. Dimensional requirements are obviously very important, as well as utility requirements. Things like building access, right? So you can design, great counters and lines, but you got to keep in mind if it's on the second floor and it's got to go up an elevator, for instance, can it fit and get to where it needs to go? So the basics, of course, that are getting specified and figured out as we lead up to actually producing and providing great serving lines, no matter who the provider happens to be. But what are some of the customer needs beyond those basics, right? Beyond the dimensional utilities. When it comes to serving lines, of course, merchandising and decor are very important, right? So the serving lines themselves need to look great. They need to do a good job of portraying the food products and making sure that consumers are having a great experience. We'll touch on a little more of that coming up. Food safety, of course, as I mentioned, continues to be very important in the hot and cold holding, as well as the ambient areas. And what does that mean today? Beyond just your typical hot and cold wells, flexible equipment solutions. So we need to make sure we're thinking about equipment solutions that are flexible, not just for today, but also into the future, helping to future-proof serving lines as much as we can today with flexible equipment that can be used in multifunction settings. And then enhanced sanitation, right? Things like these non-traditional shield locations such as cash counters, which we see everywhere, right? Beyond just serving lines, even in your local C-stores, you know, we've got all these shields at least currently, and you know, that will likely continue well into the future and beyond the pandemic to some extent. Mobile hand wash stations, something that have been around, but even more and more need to get these hand washing stations into non-traditional locations, if you will, that don't have the hard plumbing or the area for permanent stations, but the ability to do that. And then there's more beyond that as far as options that are being included into these serving lines today.
Hey, Tim, this is Janelle. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, it's really hard to hear you. So you kind of fade in and out. Is there a way you can get closer to the speaker for our attendees?
Yeah, I'm standing right next to it. You can hear me okay now?
If you kind of like stay real close.
I'm going to check my settings real quick. All right, well, we'll stay right on top of it. You hear me okay there?
Yep, if you stay right there, I think we'll be good.
All righty. So
Thank you.
So first, let's just look at the overall serving line details, right? So, you know, we're focused primarily on the K through 12, but really serving lines go well beyond that, of course. When we think about the mobile type serving lines, like the Shelley line that Delfield offers, and obviously many more out there in the market today that are similar, those tend to be geared more towards the schools, but not always, right? We still see, especially in some high schools, the needs for some of these more permanent counters with a lot of the higher end decor. So that can be laminates, different top materials, standoff panels where you can help add a little dimension, make the colors pop a bit. Even on the mobile lines that are provided that you see out there, you're still seeing a lot of that get included, even at, you know, the K-12 levels, even in the elementary schools where they've got some nice laminates and some different colors, getting into different graphics packages, school themes, you name it. They want to keep it exciting for the kids, especially that are coming through there, and have it be a good experience and a good merchandising overall. And so obviously, like I said, there's mobile lines, there's permanently fixed lines, but a lot of the same needs as far as the overall merchandising and decor appeal throughout. You know, a few different examples here where, you know, you see something that's a little more conservative there with the brown laminates and the light tan solid surface tops. You've got some higher end shields here that are incorporated with the black powder coated legs up to the upper right there. A very simple, clean look with some white laminates, some white solid surface materials. And then in the bottom right corner, you know, using different colors with different laminates, the purse rail being that bright, vibrant green color like you see here, really helps it pop off with that gray. I mean, so a lot of thought can go into the different decor options on these different serving lines, even in the K through 12s. And then something as simple as frosting the glass and adding some different decor to the glass itself can easily be done as an option. And then your higher end metallic laminates, right? You don't see this necessarily as much in the K through 12s. We see this more on the B&I side, right? Where they really looking for that laminate to pop. And these pictures don't do it justice on this particular example that I'm showing here, but super sharp. Obviously, there's a cost associated with these really nice metallic type laminates. But again, adding into that overall merchandising appeal and the overall decor and aesthetics. And then looking at more of the mobile or the K through 12 geared side, again, still the need for the aesthetics and the overall great looks of the lines, whether it be different graphics and themes from the specific schools. You see the forest theme in the bottom left there that we did for an elementary school that's available. And then more basic type color schemes and laminates like you see on the images on the right. But that top right one, again, adding something as simple as that standoff panel helps add a little dimension, make it pop, and have it look great and overall appealing, and then able to have a great look, but keep it relatively simple in that application. Simple things like theme packages you see, especially in the elementary schools. But getting down to the more of the sanitation gear, right? The food safety side of it. Let's talk a little bit about cold pan designs, right? And this really across the industry, regardless of whether it's Delfield or another provider, manufacturer, there's usually 4 different types of cold pan designs. Different folks do it a little bit different way, but in general, you tend to see these ice cooled pans, which very simple, right? Typically, these are used in areas where maybe there's not as much flexibility with power sources. Maybe it's just temporary storage in a temporary setup for a cart, short-term storage, foods that are not potentially hazardous typically there. You want, when you're using these ice cold pans, typically to look for one that is still at least foamed to help slow down the melting of the ice. But obviously very, very basic when compared to some of the designs like we will talk about next with the refrigerated cold pan designs that are out there. And so the first one we'll touch on is the forced air units that you typically see, right? And so these units will typically have some type of vents or louvers down inside, depending on the manufacturer, the evaporator coils or fans, if it's a drop-in like shown here in this image versus being built into, let's say, into a counter fully where the base maybe is where some of the cooling is going on. But in general, you typically have more, like I said, louvers, parts, and components down inside. And so the benefit of the forced air that you can see is that, you know, you can get often up flush mount type designs. They're not all flush mount. Sometimes there's still a bit of a recess. This particular example is flush mount, but then there's some air deflectors like you see in the picture here to keep that air curtain that goes above the pans directed over to the food products. Some variances in the designs that you see out there, but typically the benefit that you get from the forced air is that it's able to function in operations that are more 24/7 based because you can more easily build in defrost functionality because it's forced air cooling versus the cold wall designs that we'll talk about next. So with the cold wall designs, you get a little bit simpler, cleaner design. You typically do not have those fans or vents or openings down in the pan itself. So when we look at the third one here, the refrigerated cold wall designs, you typically, like I said, you don't have those extra components down inside. And so one of the key benefits you get from going from forced air designs like this in a serving line to a cold wall type is it's much easier to clean out. If there's a spillage inside, you don't have products being dumped on top of fans or louvers or hard to clean places. These cold wall type constructed pans are typically much easier to wipe out, right? Because the mechanical components themselves are not located in the refrigerated area most of the time. And so with those, you'll typically see anywhere from a 2 to 3.5 inch recess, depending on the manufacturer. Obviously that will depend on the efficiency of the designs, how well the foaming is, the refrigeration system itself. But the idea, of course, is to get it as close to flush as possible while maintaining safe NSF temperatures, of course. And so when you look at those safe temperatures and what NSF requires for certification, they're not dictating anything as far as how much that recess needs to be. They'd be okay if it was flush mount. What they're really dictating is holding that temperature between that 33 and 41 degrees at all times, right? And so that's why you see some variance depending on the manufacturer as far as how much that recess is. And we'll touch on in the next slide here, one of the key things with the foaming and why it's very important that process is done very well. And then kind of a step up from that, and a fourth one that we'll touch on here is a cold wall type of construction, but that incorporates also eutectic fluid, right? And so this still uses those wrapped refrigeration lines like the cold wall construction where you've got those refrigerated lines in the walls, but it also adds the additional eutectic fluid down inside those walls, sealed in, static, but given the extra benefit for increasing that cooling capacity, because once that fluid gets cold, it helps maintain those colder temperatures for longer. And typically designs like this that are incorporating that extra fluid for helping with that cooling process typically tend to be flush mount. So just looking at the overall designs, of course, refrigeration systems are very important. You've got to have a well-designed refrigeration system as far as when it comes to cooling. But you know, any real refrigerated base or refrigerated cold pan, obviously the better job that can be done as far as foaming it, the the more efficient design is typically going to be. But beyond just the insulation capabilities, having a good foam process obviously adds some construction stability to the design itself, right? Once that foam cures. So just a couple different versions here, just showing, how this cold pan here, that's a cold wall type construction, where this was a liquid foaming process where during manufacturing, the walls were basically filled, it cured and solidified. And not only is it a great, insulator, but again, adds a structural integrity to the overall design. Versus an example on the right that you see that is most likely a lower cost alternative, right? Where loose board foam basically slid into the walls, copper wrapped lines still used on this design, but they're secured in place with foil tape during the manufacturing process. And so you can see that, the option on the left, which does a good job of securing those lines tight against the wall, filling all the gaps with that foam so that there's no room for condensation and ice to build up in the walls, versus the foaming on the right, where it's essentially that loose board foam with lots of room for ice and condensation and copper lines to move and separate from the walls. So it's more, you got to have more than just good refrigeration performance, right? You got to have a great foaming design process as well. So that's key, no matter which refrigerated cold pan option that we're looking at, is that it also has a great foaming process as well. And then beyond that, just looking at an example, Liquitech happens to obviously be the Delfield version of this, but getting to those flush mount pans, in particular on front of the house serving lines, it's absolutely critical for improving that merchandising ergonomics, especially if it's a back of the house unit, and then even labor efficiency, just from getting away from constantly having to reach down to the pan that 2 inches plus into these cold pans. And so now we're going to go live with Marcy Matthews and look at an actual equipment example. Take it away, Marcy.
Thanks, Tim. So as Tim was talking about our Liquitech, this is a great example of that product shown in a Shelly mobile serving base. As you can see, the pans are completely flush with the top. So very easy to work out of from a serving as well as service capability. So if you think about the merchandising ability as well as the ergonomics, both of those factors are taken into consideration when you get this really clean, seamless look. So how Liquitech works a little differently is that we are able to maintain NSF temperatures in the flush mount application by wrapped refrigeration pan. So you still have the traditional wrapped pan inside, and then that pan is encased in a static glycol system. I say static because that's important to just talk about that versus a pumped system. If you think about a pumped system, it has more pieces that are moving, and this really becomes a very simple system that allows the pan to get cold and stay cold. So really those being the key advantages. Again, back to the NSF, obviously we want to maintain that NSF temperature. So this truly becomes the perfect solution for a front of the house application when it comes to serving. So we are showing this in a Shelly base here. I'll just take a quick look around the unit. A Shelly base with a Flexi Shield counter protector. And we'll talk a little bit more about Flexi Shield counter protectors in the next unit that I have to show you. But we also offer this in an EcoMark custom solution, as well as a drop-in solution, and in a PTB raised rail application. So as we have developed the Liquitech, it has gained in popularity. So that's why you see it across several different products, because our customers are always looking for ways to serve products in a more attractive manner. The Liquitech does that and offers the ergonomics for the operator as well. Let's take one more look here. Here's without a pan. So again, back to the really easy to clean, simple lines that Tim was talking about. And then this well here has the pan in the well.
Great. Thanks for that example, Marcy. So, obviously, the idea, again, getting up to that flush mount, in particularly important on these serving lines, improving that overall merchandising appeal. for the consumers themselves. And so just one option available as far as cold well designs to get there. So, we'll address any questions, like I said, at the end on those particular cold wells. And so let's talk a little more about hot well designs as well, right? So obviously it's important to hold cold at the proper temperatures, but we also want to make sure we're doing a good job as far as speccing in the right hot well designs also. And so really just to cover a few different types of hot well designs, and obviously there's variants and different things that different manufacturers will do. But in general, you have a couple different types and then an extension that we'll talk about as well. And so, usually you can have an open tank or a bain-marie type where there may be immersion heaters, there may be still cow rod heaters underneath, but in general, you have one large open tank. It's going to require water typically to help with the overall heat transfer and temperature consistency throughout that well. One benefit is that it's ease of use. It's much simpler. You have one control, a bit of a set it and forget it, right? You set the control to one setting or one temperature in the entire well, whether it be made for 2 12x20s or 6 12x20s, is really trying to heat to all the same temperature throughout. If you want a little more individual control, of course, we've got individual wells that are obviously available as well. And so these individually controlled wells there's different versions, some sealed, some not. But we'll talk about the sealed versions here, where typically you've got a cow rod type heating element for each 12x20 opening. The wells are completely separated from one another. The drains may or may not be tied together, depending on where they're going and whether they need to hold water or be able to drain individually. You may have one gate valve where they're all manifolded together to that one valve, or you could have even individual valves per well. But you typically see a higher wattage per well on standard units, anywhere in that 1,000 to 1,200 watt range. And because the cow rod heater is essentially underneath each opening of the well, you're basically blasting the bottom of these wells with heat. And then you typically, even although most of them can be ran wet or dry, depending on the manufacturer's recommendations, typically, wet operation is usually recommended because the heat source being high wattage at the bottom of the pan, the water helps, again, distribute that heat throughout the wells. You get a little more consistent temperatures typically when you use it with water. If you run these dry for the ones that are recommended that could be used for dry use, you can get a little bit of inconsistency on the temperatures, although the food would still typically be safe throughout the range. Manufacturers, including Delfield, would only recommend typically running these dry if they knew it was going to still meet NSF, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have a 10-degree temperature swing from one pan to another because you don't have the water helping with that consistency on these types of the designs. And so the water, obviously, as it gets hot, creates the steam. You hear about steam tables. We're not using that steam, of course, to add any hydration to the food products itself. The steam, of course, filling the pan or under the pans above the water and help distributing that heat. However, if you take it to another level where you see now we've got lower wattage versions of these types of hot wells available today, low watts, and typically they're around that 500 watt per well range. And you think, well, obviously if you're cutting the wattage in half, it must not heat quite as well, but you still have to meet the same holding temperature standards as the 1,000 watts. So what you find is that it's a more efficient type of design. You typically are getting away from those cow rod heaters or immersion heaters at the bottom that are simply just blasting heat from below. And you'll see the image here we have on the upper right as an example of how Delfield will do it, is you're basically surrounding the pan itself with a very efficient heat pad so that you're distributing the heat very well throughout that entire 12x20 individual well. And so what you find is that even though this is also designed for wet or dry operation, we typically recommend these to be dry use, right? So because it's a more efficient design, obviously you insulate it very well also. Because it's more efficient design, not only can you run it at roughly half the wattage, but it's also doing a better job of distributing the heat throughout that well. And so you have less need for that water to help you do so. And so when you are able to run it dry, and do that heating, there's advantages obviously beyond just the energy savings that you get from those lower watts. You're also obviously able to eliminate water use. So a few different things on the water use. Obviously there's some savings there during the install, not having to run the water to it, not having to worry about the drains. We do see customers that will run these dry, but still specify them with drains simply to make the cleaning process more convenient. So you can still spec these with drains to help with the end of the day clean out, but they do not have to be ran with water to help that temperature consistency. And so getting rid of that water also helps take away that concern about water quality, right? So as you know, as through the life of these wells, as the water gets hot, depending on the water quality, various levels of calcium can build up in corrosion in the wells. And so you get into this battle of using these harsh chemicals to remove that off and on, and then you end up deteriorating the well over time to remove that, right? So if we can get water out of the equation completely, more the better, right? Not just in the upfront install costs, but through to help extend the life of the equipment and help lower the overall labor involved with it. Also, we see typically reduced surface temperatures with the lower wattage units. So because they're more efficient, because more of the heat's actually going directed into the well itself versus just, again, blasting the bottom, you have less residual heat that ends up going into the actual serving line tops. Obviously, this is critical on any serving line, but especially in the elementary schools with the younger kids who may be shorter, obviously. They walk up to the counters, they go to rest their arms on it. Even if they're being served over, the front nosings of those counters can be very hot at times. And so anything we can do to also reduce the overall top surface temperatures is critical as well. So let's talk just a little bit more about those lower wattage type versions. What you'll see here is that because it is, again, a more efficient type of design and you don't necessarily have to use the water, you actually get better energy savings if you don't, right? So because of that initial heat up earlier in the day, especially in schools, obviously, that are running these for just a few hours, midday typically, they come in, turn it on to heat it up. If they have water in the well, they need to have a longer period of time to actually heat that water up before they're actually efficiently heating the actual food products. And so running these dry, you actually get upwards, we've seen at least in our examples, upwards of 77% energy reduction versus a comparable 1,000-watt model, right? And so you still see some energy savings even on wet use, but typically, again, we're recommending that it can be ran dry and still able to achieve those safe temperatures. And so now we're going to go ahead and look at the heated serving counter with hot wells in it, and we'll flip back over to Marcy Matthews again. Go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Tim. All right, so this unit here is one that features the Delfield ESP, which stands for Energy Savings Power. As Tim mentioned, in a dry application, you can see up to a 77% energy reduction. The one interesting thing that we've also built into this example is you'll notice that not only the hot food wells are here, but there's also this recess around the top perimeter. That recess adds in additional flexibility with the ability to hold either a 12 by 20 pan or an 18 by 26 sheet pan. So this is something that I always recommend when I'm looking at a serving line design, just because, if you think about future-proofing your equipment and flexibility that, you hear come up all of the time that customers are looking for more flexibility, then you have that additional flexibility built into this with the option to use that in the 12 by 20 or the 18 by 26. Like Tim mentioned, these units can be used in a dry application, maintaining NSF temperatures. So, you don't have to add water. Sometimes our customers like to add a drain in so that they have the ability to clean the unit out when needed. But, we really recommend that they use them dry. Using them dry takes the water out of the line. So no one has to put it in, no one has to take it out. There's no harshness that's happened to the pan because of the water going in. There's no need for a floor drain, so maybe you're working on a design that's in a kitchen or cafeteria that they want to move it around. They don't want to have to use a drain. This is a great application for that. The other thing is that because of the gentle, even heat, you are heating the food pan. You're not heating everything around it. And when I say everything around it, the most important piece to that is this top surface. So the top surface is not heated as high as it would be with a traditional 1,000-watt Kelrod heater that is really doing everything that it can to heat the water up in the pan to conduct that heat to the food product. Whereas this is just going to be a gentle, even heat that's going to distribute that heat nicely through the food product, not distribute the heat to everything around the well. The ESP is available in a Shelly base as it's shown here. 1 through 6 wells, we're showing a 4-well unit here, but it is available in 1 through 6 wells. It's also available built into an EcoMark fabrication base, as well as a drop-in product.
All right, thank you, Marcy. Yeah, so love the added flexibility, obviously, with that recess area, right? With the ability to put the sheet pans at the top or food pans underneath, right? So specking in that 1-inch recess, even on the cold unit that we had shown as an example, give you a good idea if you know that they want that flexibility with having sheet pans one day or for one meal period versus the pans during another. So let's talk about multifunction wells, right? So convertible type units that will hold in hot or cold holding functions. You know, there's different designs out there. They tend to vary. Open tank designs that you'll see that are either all hot or all cold. Example down here, drop-in version of that Delfield has available, but again, you don't have that individual control per well in this design. You know, consumers have the added flexibility of being able to run it hot or cold. But again, it's the entire well is hot or the entire well is cold. In these particular examples, you tend to have, because it's an open tank, an immersion heater type style. So water is required when you have those immersion heaters. Then there's various versions of individual well designs out there that will also function either hot or cold, but because they're individual wells, you typically see that you've got the flexibility to adjust those wells individually, of course, to be either hot or cold in any combination. And so you could, you know, in theory, have hot, cold at a 4-well and mix it up and change it anytime throughout the day. Some versions of these types of convertible units out there have freezer modes available also. And it tends to vary on whether wet or dry hot holding capabilities are available in these types of designs. Again, it can depend on whether the open tank designs or these immersion heaters, some of the individual wells by some manufacturers, they will have recommendations that you can run them dry. Most of these do tend to operate better though with water in the wells. We also see various versions of during the cold holding function, whether they're actually flush mount or recessed, right? Again, varying by designs. Some of these you can have flush mount capabilities, while others do have to have the pans recessed. And so because you're switching between the hot and cold functionality, there may be an adjustable pan rest where you're able to put it up flush, let's say during the hot, but you may need to drop that down during the cold operation, approximately 2 inches. And of course, these are available as drop-ins and built-ins by most manufacturers that provide this type of multifunction well. It does vary though on what's available as far as whether they'll go up to 4 or 6 wells, depending on the manufacturer. And so Delfield does have a couple different versions of this. I mentioned the example at the bottom with the drop-in, the open tank design, but we do also have an individual well design as well, which we'll switch over to Marcy Matthews, and she'll show you an example of here for the FlexiWell by Delfield.
All right, thanks, Tim. So this is one of the newest products in the Delfield portfolio that we launched this year. That is our FlexiWell. So the nice thing about the FlexiWell is that it truly is independently controlled, hot or cold. So in this 2-well application, I could have 2 wells hot, I could have 2 wells cold, I could have 1 hot and 1 cold in any combination. So they're truly independently controlled. And I'm going to go around the other side and show you the control in just a second. So you see this pan here, would be in a hot application. So this is flush mount. It comes with a divider or adapter bar here. I can just grab this out of here real quick. An adapter that allows you to take this and put it in a 2-inch recess for cold or flush mount for hot. So very easy to make that adjustment. Also, you will see that it does have an immersion heater. So this does require water to operate in the hot function. Cold function, no water, of course, but the hot application does require water to operate. When you think about flexibility, building it into serving lines, we think that this product is really the piece that does future-proof any type of serving line, because if you're moving between day parts, for instance, or even, limited time offerings, it gives you the ability to easily make that adjustment. So the control has a 3-position switch. That's a hot, off, and cold. You can see that there. When the unit is in the hot application, it will have the infinite dial that's 1 through 10 to allow you to adjust the temperature. So this well is a 2-well, so there are 2 separate controls, again, having the ability to independently control those wells. Open the mechanical section here to take a quick look at the drain configuration. So this unit does have a gate valve that is going to control each one of the wells independently, so that if you have this in a hot and a cold, you can turn the well that you want to hold the water in off and contain the water in that well, and then of course not put any water in the other well and drain that out. That all terminates to a final drain at the base of the unit that can then be plumbed to a floor drain.
All right. Thank you, Marcy. Yep. So, lots of different variances again on what's available out there, but the idea is obviously to add that, future proofing, if you will, right? So we want to give the flexibility now, but also for the future. So, the menu, especially in schools and other institutions, or really any serving line, but especially there where they tend to change up the menus. They may not each month or each week, they may have certain days where they're doing the same things, but it's usually not the same day to day. And then they do mix it up throughout time. So it's good to have that flexibility built in throughout, so that, like I said, you can run those individual wells in any combination, hot or cold, and give that ability to have that flexibility now and well into the future, offering that menu flexibility for those customers. And so just continuing on the theme, obviously, or moving on to more of the sanitation with the food shields. There's a lot of different variances on what's available out there, of course. You've got your more traditional, like you see here in this bottom left, what you would expect to see on your more traditional lines, especially in the K through 12s. You've got your steel framework, you get your basic, it depends, it could be safety glass, some plexiglass, in some specifications tempered glass, but it's usually a lower cost, a little more industrial type looking, if you will, versus your higher end shields like you see in the examples to the right. But, a lot of variances on whether they're self-service, full service designs, obviously fixed as well as adjustable versions are available across the board. A lot of different variances out there, single, dual, triple levels, single and dual sided, depending on whether the line is single or dual sided, of course. And there's a lot of dimensional guidelines that go into that in order to maintain NSF certifications on food shields. And so, we often hear, especially, at Delfield, we get feedback that sometimes it's difficult to reach in and get to the actual food products with some of these food shields. And so NSF's got some pretty strict guidelines as far as dimensional allowances, as in the front, You got a 13-inch basically max opening height that's allowed to maintain the NSF certification. Other calculations that go in as far as distance from the front of the glass to the back of the well, or front of the wells rather. And so there's a lot going on there. We'll get too deep into those actual NSF guidelines, but everybody that provides food shields needs to be able to design them in a way that will meet these NSF certifications in order to have the NSF logo on the equipment. And so Delafield, of course, follows that strictly. And so looking at the different versions of these, you can see that, if you remember some of the images that we showed, there were some really nice looking counters, had great decor on them, but then still had the very basic counter protectors included. And then you saw the exact opposite of the spectrum where we saw some very basic counters with just a blue laminate, let's say, that had the higher end glass shields. And so the higher end, the object is to have as much glass as possible and eliminate as much steel and structure as possible so that you're keeping the food safe while highlighting the food, right? Ideally, the consumer will see only the food as much as possible, right? Not the shield itself. So you maximize the glass into the design, you minimize the actual structure and support as much as you can to have that food safety while having great merchandising and access to the food itself. But again, you get some interaction there with what you're allowed to do from the dimensional guidelines to maintain those NSF certifications, which I'm sure most of you, if not all, are familiar with, and you've heard feedback on from your clients. So let's talk a little more about those higher end types, if you will. So for Delafield, that's the Flexi Shield counter protectors, which there's, again, multiple different versions of that. Fixed glass designs, whether they be self-service or full service. Obviously today with the challenges we have, especially in schools, kids may or may not be actually in session at the schools, but we still see that they are serving a lot of meals to kids that need it, whether the school's actually got live classes or not. So a lot of these cafeterias are still functional, and we still need to give them some flexibility in these designs. So if you go with the adjustable types on the Flexi Shield, similar to what we talked about on those multifunction units, the FlexiWell example for Delafield, you're helping future-proof, right? So now for the lines where the kids are actually maybe still using these serving lines today, they may be all full service with the glass down. Things improve, hopefully. I think some of this will be around for the long term, even as the situation with COVID hopefully improves as soon as possible. But I think we'll see a little more hesitation to open up that full service to the kids right away, but we'll see how that plays out. But when you have these adjustable style counter protectors, you're helping future-proof for situations like this, right? Nobody saw this coming, but this is obviously a good example where this plays out, where you can bring that glass down, have it be full service, but then adjust it up and have it be self-service into the future. And so we do have some examples. I know you caught some snapshots of it when Marcy was up front, and so we'll flip back to Marcy and she'll demonstrate the adjustability.
All right, so on this unit here that we talked about, the ESP hot food wells, this one has a unique counter protector on it that actually has the ability to be positioned into 3 different positions, whether it's for self-service. There's one position in between in the event that the operator would like to pass under, and then as well as full service. So you could see how easy that was for me to maneuver through, all without the use of tools. It was easy to get to all 3 positions. I don't have to worry that any of these positions are not in compliance with NSF. I know that no matter where I put this counter protector, that the NSF is taken care of. There's no guesswork, there's no tools. Like Tim mentioned, very clean, minimalistic look. You really want to focus on what's there that you're serving, which is the food. You don't want to see a bunch of hardware. So that is our objective with the Flexi Shield, is to provide a simple, easy to use, very clean design. Of course, many different styles, whether it's the 3-position Flexi Shield that we show here, or that could also be a self-serve style. Of course, all of the different styles that someone is looking for when incorporating counter protectors into their lines. The other great thing about the Flexi Shield is that not only do we offer them on our products as they're shown here, but we also ship them as freestanding pieces. When we ship them as freestanding pieces to mount on maybe a millwork counter in the field, it will come completely assembled. So everything that you see here, how it's built, will be packaged on a crate and shipped to you. So when you get to the job site, you'll basically take the counter protector off of the pallet and put it onto the counter. Can add to can lead to a big advantage if you have seen some of the counter protectors that come that are in many different pieces and take several hours for an installer to install in the field. So just wanted to point that out as well. Again, just thinking about flexibility, you heard Tim and I say it many times throughout the presentation today, and working to future-proof the investment for the customer for the long term, whether they are changing service styles, changing what they are serving, or managing through a pandemic. We want to help them with flexible solutions.
Great, thank you, Marcy. And so in the last few minutes before we move on to some questions and interaction with you, we've also seen the need for some more enhanced sanitation, right? Which we mentioned earlier on, various different forms of plexiglass shields. You see now where, whether it be on a serving line or like I mentioned, in your local C-store, even cashier stations now, we have these shields in place. Typically they're plexiglass. Non-food zones, those are available to be integrated into serving lines as well. And so you've got different types of versions of that, whether they be stationary freestanding ones that actually stand on the floor themselves that you just kind of push up to the edge of a counter, actual countertop mounting versions, which are very similar to what you would see on a glass shield, maybe in a food zone. But to keep costs down, we can use plexiglass on that today. And so we'll see how this plays out on whether, once things improve, if all this goes away or at some level, we're still going to see some of this integrated into these lines or cashier stations where offering some protection between the interaction of the people, not just the people with the food, right? And so just showing a few examples. The countertop mounting, again, things like just little cutouts for pass-throughs of payment if it happens to be on the cash stand. With everything that we dealt with the pandemic, a lot of these types of shields had to get added into installations as an afterthought, but we, obviously can be integrated into these serving lines in these non-food zones with the counters as they're produced. And so keep that in mind, obviously, as we're specifying designs going forward. And then, of course, the freestanding versions where it could be some existing counters. Maybe we don't have the flexibility to integrate it into the counter, but you still have some form of a shield that can be slid in place for protection. Again, this example here in a cash station that you see there on the right. Mentioned earlier, the hand wash stations, right? So this isn't completely new, right? We've seen these mobile hand stations that they've been available, but more and more of a need for that for areas where maybe the thought to actually have hand washing more locally available in that particular area may not have been needed before, but we need these areas to enable to be able to do that hand washing, but we don't have the utilities for a permanent or hard piping in. And so you get these hand wash stations that are available where we've got the wastewater and the freshwater tanks on board, water heaters integrated so that you can get both the hot and cold water integrated into this station. And depending on the designs, you could have upwards of 70 hand washings with the full tank of fresh water. And then some other integration that we see into these serving lines, more needs for face mask holders, glove holders. Gloves obviously have been around the kitchen in lines, but more so today than ever, obviously, with the enhanced focus on the sanitation. And so we've got various versions of ways that those can be mounted to the counters to, again, integrate those thoughtfully into the design as they're being specified design produced and provided to the customers. There could be countertop stands for those dispensers, whether they be glove or mask holders, or even sanitizer pumps, right, where we can mount those stands directly to the actual serving lines or cashier stations. And there could be fixed ones, rotating versions available. So you can have multi-faced versions where you've got the sanitizer on one side and perhaps a dispenser for the gloves or the masks mounted to the back plate of that. And so again, we can do some thoughtful design for some of these enhanced sanitation solutions as we're building or producing it and frankly upfront specifying these serving lines. So with that, I know there was some questions along the way. And then of course, if there's anything that anybody was holding, I'll turn it over, if you would, Janelle, if you want to go ahead, please take the lead on those questions, please.
Yeah, great. Thanks to Tim and Marcy. That was some great information. So we have several questions for you. The first one, do you insulate the tops to avoid heat transfer from the heat wrap to the stainless steel?
We insulate the wells themselves, especially on the ESP. We want to contain that heat around the well as much as we can. If you think about the higher wattage wells, those are also insulated by the actual around the well. But because you've got that higher wattage, you actually have more heat being generated under the well. You still tend to get a little more residual heat throughout the cabinet, especially if it's enclosed, like the mobile serving line bases for Delfield, the Shelley example, where there tend to be a little more enclosed, even though there's some vent ports on it. If you get the heat built up in the base and with that increased residual heat, some of that's going to end up migrating into the top. So, all of these hot wells, the top is going to get warm. It's not that you're going to get rid of all that heat, but the more efficient and lower wattage, able to hold food safely without needing that extra wattage at the higher watts, it just translates into cooler tops.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What about the food quality when running the wells dry? What prevents the food from burning or drying out?
Yeah, so whether you're using water or you're running them dry, typically, hopefully they're turning products fast enough to where you don't have to worry about products sitting in the bottom of the pan for a long time. But if there are slow periods, we'd still recommend that there's stirring of the products, helps with the overall food quality, prevents anything at the bottom from getting too hot, whereas maybe the top could start to cool, right? But as far as the water, the purpose of the water in a hot well is primarily to help create some steam and distribute that heat under the pans themselves, not necessarily to add moisture to the food products, right? So running them dry, we don't tend to get feedback to the products running any drier than they do when they use water. We're giving that, and as we mentioned, you're welcome to still use water in those lower wattage designs. You're adding some complexity to the installation if you need the water, right? From the installation, the long-term care, the cleaning out throughout the life of the equipment.
All right, next question. Are there any special mounting considerations when you're mounting into a solid surface countertop?
Yeah, so if you're working with us at Delfield, and I imagine it's similar with other manufacturers, if we're doing all the mounting, we're gonna work that all out through the design process ahead of time. We'll usually specify, if we're providing the actual solid surface, we'll work with our actual stone or solid surface provider to make sure we're designing in any accommodations that are needed, holes that are put through that material. We may, have some type of, shim or bushing that runs down through that hole that goes through the material so that it's actually steel between whatever's being mounted and the actual unit top, so you're not compressing the actual solid surface material or stone and potentially, cracking it over time or even during the installation. And so that's one benefit to having it all done in one place where the shields, let's say, are being mounted to those tops by one provider. All that can be sorted out. If it's being added after the fact in the field, you may not have that designed into the material to be able to accommodate that as well.
So let's go back to the flexi wells. Does the flexi well have a low water shut off for hot well use? And is it available with an auto fill?
It is not currently available with an autofill. There are safeties built in so that if the water does happen to run out, that it'll protect the heaters from burning up. But we do, in this design, need to make sure for proper just temperature performance that we keep the waters in the wells slightly above those immersion heaters. But there are safeties built in to protect obviously the equipment, and then of course ultimately the customer from unnecessary repairs.
Thanks, Tim. I have another question regarding the multifunctional wells. Do they work in warmer climates, and can you get remote condensers?
Yeah, so the remote is not currently available. There's a lot of mechanics that go on inside these. So at least for the Delfield models, they are all self-contained. We've got obviously the refrigeration components, but then also all the hot well components that are built into those bases. So if you look at the drop-in versions, whether it be Delfield or really any manufacturers, you'll see that the drop-in versions, you might as well just get the entire base from that provider, because the components that are underneath and attached to the wells themselves are almost as big as a self-contained base anyways. So there really is not room underneath for additional components to speak of. So we build all those in, or we can provide them as drop-in, but they're, at least from Delfield, they're always self-contained.
Great. And then in regards to sanitation, I have a couple of questions for you. You talked about a mobile hand washing unit. How is the wastewater removed from that unit?
Yeah, so there's a separate tank for the wastewater. So because there's no actual hard plumb drains or anything like that, it would be a manual process of taking the wastewater tank out and dumping it.
Okay. And then as far as the hand sanitizing station, do you have one of those for students or for the student serving lines?
Yeah, really, we could put those, if you're talking about the actual stands that we can mount to the lines, really wherever you specify those, we can put those into the lines. Yes, we can put those sanitizer stands anywhere on the line that you spec.
Do you offer different heights of the mounting or?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Really, you could specify that height. Obviously, we need to understand where the height of the dispenser and all that, so that you can actually get up underneath it and dispense. But I think that would be the only restriction to the height, is you can only get so low to the counter and still be able to get the sanitizer out.
Okay. And one more question for you, Tim. Do you offer a hidden caster option?
What we do is actually we can extend the bases to go down very near to the floor, so that, yes, it does essentially, or we can put on kick plates as well that would flash in front of the casters. But if you look at let's say that Shelley as an example line, we could just run those fronts of the bases down, within, let's say, a ½ inch of the floor. You don't want to get too close to the floor, because there can be some variances when they're pushing these around. You don't want them to bottom out, but that would be essentially how we hide the casters, extend the bases down in front of them.
Okay, and do you offer custom display shield supports such as wrought iron or power-coated flat steel in lieu of tubular supports?
Yeah, we do. We use a material called Octanorm for like menu boards, displays, things like that, that we can use in powder coat.
Great. Well, it looks like those are the questions we had today. I appreciate your time, both of you, you and Marcy. And then we're going to hand it back over to Tim McDougall.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks again, Tim and Marcy, and thank you to Joe as well for his session as well. Great information, guys. I really appreciate your time. That brings session 2 to a close. I want to grab some lunch and tune in again at 12:45 for session 3, featuring cooking with rapid cook ovens and a special presentation by Richard Young with Frontier Energy. So go grab you a bite to eat. Join us back here at 12:45. See you then.